All right, I'm gonna throw out a another spicy take like we've been doing at the start of each of these episodes. I think that Elon Musk is a very good businessman, and I think what he did with Twitter saved it.
Isn't it like at half its evaluation though?
It's not. It's a private company now, so its valuation is not like it has no public valuation. But it was losing 200 like it was losing millions and millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars like every year, and he has effectively got it to the point of break even. I still think Twitter's a shit platform, but it's a more stable shit platform than it was before.
I think the issue is that I remember. Funny enough, it was Lindsay Ellis who it was during her. It was the video she made after she got canceled. Um, Funny enough, now I've seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, so I understand the context behind all that thing. Um, she was talking about how the issue with Twitter is that as time goes on, getting more people to join Twitter just isn't working. Like, that doesn't really work. It's like there's always sort of like a people join, people drop off. So like the actual number of people who join. So when you're considering bringing this to like shareholders, like when you have to show actual like it's like, hey, we want to make sure the business is growing. You can't grow it from the user base, so you have to grow it via user engagement.
And that's gone up according to him.
Yeah, for maybe not the best of reasons, but
Yeah, and we don't know. Again, we don't. They don't have to disclose their information like they did when they were a public company, so we don't know what state Twitter is in. But I just think that the whole like people were memeing on him about the whole Twitter blue stuff or whatever, and I would obviously never buy anything like that. But all the people who said that they were going to quit, like the famous celebrities and stuff, they're all still there. They're all still even David Simon, the motherfucker who I shared with you that whole thing about him blocking me on Twitter because I called him
that's
out on
so
that.
funny.
I'm gonna put it in the video. I have a section dedicated to David Simon, and I put that whole little exchange in the video, which is awesome. It's the masterpiece of that part.
What's your career highlight? Getting blocked by David Simon.
No, legitimately, like
Honestly, like yeah, it's like man,
that one might be one of my most proudest moments.
we had a spat. I stood my ground. I think it's important that you should be able to you know don't back off from your heroes. No, just you should be able to push back against them. Do it.
David Simon rubs me the wrong way a lot with what he does. I respect his work obviously, but yeah, he rubs me wrong. But we're not here to talk about David Simon or Twitter. I was just throwing out some spicy takes for the
Wait,
start of
why
our
don't
pod.
you? What about David Simon?
He's just a smug kind of asshole.
Yeah,
Like
he does come off.
I've shown you his tweets. It's like he gets into fights with literal nobodies like me. I'm not claiming I'm someone. He literally got into a fight with a nobody like me when he could have easily just ignored it or just blocked me and moved on. But he made it a point to to get kind of you know testy with me.
Yeah, he really does embody that sort of um the sort of like smug liberal who
Oh,
like
definitely, yeah.
even if I agree with him, I'm like,
Yeah, and again, I mean, obviously he's made some fantastic work. A lot of it more so deserving to Ed Burns. I feel like David gets a lot of credit for what Ed Burns contributed to the show. And
Mhm.
I have a whole section where I kind of talk about how overlooked Ed Burns is for the not only the creation of The Wire, but a lot of the shows they've done together since then. But again, that's
do
a
you
whole other separate topic.
do you think? Because I remember I made my when I made my season 5 analysis on it. I talked about whether or not Ed Burns' departure from the writers' room,
Oh yeah, it's
or
100% the reason
or at
why
least in
why it
part.
sucked.
Okay, yeah. So see, I was kind of playing the on the fence of like because it was weird because he was credited on I think like 4 or 5 episodes still.
Yeah, he was
Um,
not nearly as involved because he was starting to work on their next project, which was Generation Kill.
Generation Kill.
One of the most badass miniseries I've ever seen. It's fantastic. Like if you're a fan of The Wire, go watch Generation Kill. It'll hit that same it'll scratch that same itch as The Wire does. It's really, really good.
I actually have it on. So I'm like doing like the Miracle Disaster series.
Oh
I
yeah,
have it on the list, and funny enough, I kind of held off from doing it because I actually wondered if it was going to win, and I kind of wanted to do some other shows first.
yeah, yeah.
But I was like, yeah, I have a feeling this was going to win, or Band of Brothers. Um,
That's a great one too. But I literally once I finished watching Generation Kill for the first time, I immediately just put it on again and rewatched it straight through. So like that's how amazing it is.
yeah, I think I. It's funny because I think I like watched the first episode years back, like way back, but I think I was too young to kind of appreciate it. I didn't really understand the context. I need to get back. I'll probably throw that on the next pool, and see if it wins.
How far are you along with the Avatar stuff?
Still scripting. I'm really dragging ass on it. I kind of have all my thoughts like organized. I just have to put them on the paper, and then I'm going to Dublin on the 5th for 10 days. So, and then that when I get back, I'll try to. Hopefully, I can finish the script before I leave. Well, I'll see about that. And then when I get back, I'll just record it and bang it out. And then next up is Hannibal. And then I actually, because they're both ending this, they're both ending tomorrow. Um, Succession and Barry, and I actually thought Succession was going to win, but Barry ended up winning. I think because people wanted to see it was the show doesn't get as much attention, so just thank God that both of them ended before the writer's strike hit. Although it's like we can talk about it because I think a lot of people it's like these shows were probably written way the
Oh
writing
yeah, of
process.
course,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's funny when people say shit like that. It's like, oh, they changed this because of last episode. It's like you that's not fuck like they unironically say shit like that. I'm like, bro, that's not how that works. What are you talking about?
Shows, I mean, in like some shows in the past were being made as episodes were airing, but
Hmm.
especially as shows have gotten seasons have gotten a lot shorter and the production has gotten a lot higher.
Hmm.
These things were done like last year and they were in the process of editing and then finally releasing them. But that's a great lead in to what we're about to talk about, which is the Writers Guild strike, which has been going on now for what, like 3 4 weeks,
Like 3.5
three and a
weeks.
half weeks. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it took me a second.
So yeah, it's been going on for quite a while now, and this is of course this is the second time in recent memory. I don't know if they striked ever in the past, but the other big one was the Writers Guild strike of 2008, I believe, right?
Hmm. Yep.
And that was a situation where exactly like what you were talking about, a lot of shows suffered either cancellation or they had their seasons kind of turn out shitty because they had to just kind of finish them real quick before the strike went into effect. Because all the writers in Hollywood are contractually obligated to not continue writing while the strike's going on.
I just didn't know what the increased funding and job security, increase the writer room size of writer rooms. Oh, that's kind of interesting.
Writer room size is a big one. That there's this new thing that they're doing called what is it called, micro rooms, or basically just a smaller staff of writers than what we traditionally seen on, like, you'd have a number of writers on the show working full time, whereas now it's a lot more like the gig economy. Like you just join for a short period of time, you bang out all the scripts really quickly, and then you hand it off to the showrunner, who then has to do the job of like rewriting and doing all this stuff, and then actually getting the show produced. But those writers are not included in the process as much. From what I hear, that's how Hollywood has been operating more and more recently.
That sounds like a terrible idea.
Yeah, I mean it's awful. I mean, and that's the thing too, that like I've seen people like talking about how, oh, all the shows are crap right now, so I don't care if I hope the writers get fired. I hope they lose their jobs or whatever. And I don't think that that's really the case. I don't think that's the outcome you want, even if you hate television right now, which I can sympathize with. There's a lot of bad television, but I extend them the belief that a lot of the problems are being caused by the situations that they're striking for. Like if we had larger, more permanent writing staff, they might not be putting out such shitty shows. Now, some of them will probably still be shit like they
Of
always
course,
are.
of course.
There's just a lot of trash on television. But I do believe that if there was more job security for these people, more permanence to what they're doing, they would be more invested in their shows, and they wouldn't be just putting out schlock that they just have to get filmed real quick so they can turn a quick buck.
Why would I want to join a writer's room for a season? If I'm invested in these characters, I want to develop them and see where they go, and I want to follow through the storylines that I develop. That's like it literally is like it's like the dumbest thing I could think of. When you were talking about micro writers rooms, what I thought you meant was like a writer's room could be, maybe it could be 12 people, or maybe it could be like 4 people. I wouldn't suggest going the Nick Pizzolatto route and just going, I am the only writer. It's a very bad idea. It's like I think a lot of writers like think they want that. It's like, oh, I get control over it. But it's like, no, dude, you need someone there to like check your shit. You need someone there to kind of like, because you're gonna have a lot of like, oh, I have this idea, but you need like a good trusted friend or fellow writer to be like, no, like we need to like rein this in, or we need to like shift it. Um, but yeah, I would like, like that seems like common sense. Like if you look at like the writers get attached to the characters, of course they do. And so of course, like if we're going multiple seasons, we're like, oh, we want to develop these characters, we know these characters, we've like been with these characters. To have people jump in the middle, it's like, I mean, like I'm sure like they do okay, but it's just not the same as being in that room with all the same people doing the same thing.
And actually, funny enough, David Simon, who I was just complaining about, I watched. He did a little interview about the Writers Guild strike. You know, he's participating in it. That's why he, quote unquote, returned to Twitter, was to support the Writers Guild strike. Totally not true. You could see him. He's arguing with people about completely random topics. He just wanted to do that again. So
What's Twitter for if you're not?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But he did give a great interview about the Writers Guild strike where he said that like the writers not being involved with the entire process, not just writing, but like actually being involved with production and all that stuff, means that there's going to be a generation of writers who are not then able to move on to being showrunners and stuff like that. Obviously, David Simon, a great example, got his start writing on Homicide, which is based on his novel. Wrote episodes for that, but also learned the whole process of television so that he could then go on to create the Coroner miniseries and then, of course, The Wire. So that's another reason to have writers. They're invested in the entire process because they grow and they make other shows in the future too. Vince Gilligan wrote on the X Files, eventually produced on that show, and then of course we got Breaking Bad, which famously was kind of saved by the Writers Guild strike in a way because they were gonna potentially kill off Jesse in the first season, but the Writers Guild strike forced them to end production. That's why the first season is so short.
Hmm.
And then they kind of changed their minds, and then Jesse's around for the better,
Yeah. I actually always wonder what it would have been like had Jesse been killed. Um,
Probably would have been shittier.
Probably. I think that having, obviously, like I think the character work is strong enough where it could have been carried over, or it could have, been prolonged. But
Yeah.
that the 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 way the characters play off each other, Walt and
Oh yeah,
Jesse,
it's
is
so
just
perfect.
it's just brilliant. Um, it's interesting you bring that up because it kind of goes to this question about. So yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people, when they're thinking about like a production or like what makes a good film or a TV show, they always think of like, or some people who are in the industry, they kind of think of things like, oh well, they're the writers. Oh well, they're the cinematographer. Oh, they're the
Hmm.
director or the actor. And what I think a lot of people don't understand is like a lot of these things kind of they commingle with each other. They're
Yeah.
they're the writing, and even like the writing and the cinematography, the costume design, the actors, everyone should sort of be on the same page with certain
Yeah.
things, because otherwise things can get lost in the mix.
Oh yeah.
Um, Funny enough, one of the big questions that a lot of sort of, and I think it's a fair question, one of the big questions a lot of people, even people in the film industry, ask is, what exactly is the job of the director? Like, what makes a good director? What does a
Yeah.
director actually do? Or yeah, sorry, primarily what separates a good director from a bad
Yeah.
director. And it took me a while to kind of like sort of like work out my thoughts on that to kind of answer that question. And I think the best way to describe it is kind of like a football coach or a sports coach in a way, where you have all these players. You have the cinematographer, you have the costume designer, you have the actors, the writers, all these people, the script, the set, whatever. Yeah. And as the director, you're the one who kind of has to bring everyone together to get, and obviously like you're going to trust, you trust your cinematographer, you
Oh
trust your
yeah.
set designer, you trust the writers, of course. But the director's job is to kind of bring everyone together under a single unified vision. That's sort of the idea where the cinematography is working with the right, like the cinematography is working to sort of express the writer's
Yeah.
ideas, and the actors are on in tune with the writers and they know what the writers are trying to put down, and the set design accentuates all that, so
Yeah.
everything is sort of like moving in the same direction, as opposed to like, I can think of like a bad director or a bad sort of film set where like, and I've seen this happen where like the writing, you'll have the writer, you'll have the script, and
Yeah.
then the the cinematographer, the editors was, hey, let's just like cut this chunk out, and it's like, what are you
Hmm.
doing? Like, you can't. It defeats the entire
Yeah.
purpose of what it was going for.
They're the conductor to the orchestra. Everyone's playing their
Exactly.
individual instruments, but there has to be someone who's kind of managing all of them, making sure they're all in harmony.
Hmm.
And it's funny too because we associate that with the role of director nowadays. Primarily, I believe because people like Hitchcock created this idea of like the auteur, director. Like the director is the one kind of running the show, whereas I believe originally that was more like the executive producer role, and for a lot of early cinema that was the kind of main person running the show. And it's true too for a television show like what we've been talking about. That's the job of now the showrunner who's running all these stuff. They're not directing individual episodes, with maybe some special occasions, like obviously Vince Gilligan directed the pilot and like the first or last episodes of the seasons. Um, but now for a television show, a director is now just one of those players too.
Hmm.
They're coming in, they're directing their piece, and then they're leaving, and the showrunners again making sure that it all kind of comes together. And funny enough, that's what David Simon was also talking about in that interview, which is a lot of the work about rewriting scripts has been outsourced to the showrunner. um, they get all the scripts for all the episodes that the small staff typed out, and now they have to do the rewriting. There's a lot that goes into that, and that's distracting them from, again, being the job of the conductor, like managing all the entire process. And I think that's one of the issues they're striking about too, which I could definitely see.
As the showrunner, you shouldn't have to. If the writer is on your staff, they should know the characters and they should know the vibe of the show and what you're going for. So the fact that you would have to, now obviously, like there are some cases where I think Matthew Weiner for Mad Men, it was said that he had complete veto power. Like he would take all of the scripts and he would go over like every piece of dialogue and he would have final say over it.
Matt's another one that
Yeah.
I love his work, but he kind of rubs me the wrong way. If you've
Yeah, I
seen him in
agree.
interviews, like you can tell he's full of himself. Like he loves to hear himself talk.
He's like, I wrote for The Sopranos, so get fucked. Um, but on the other hand, the entire point of assembling the writers' room is that he, as the showrunner, is like, look, yes, I do like have veto power, of course, and yeah, and like stuff like that. But I also trust the writers that they understand these characters and the conflicts and the character arcs. So yes, he might do a little bit, but it probably isn't that much. But like what you're saying, it's like, yeah, if you have a bunch of random writers and they don't really understand the characters, or maybe their take on a certain character or dynamic isn't the same as maybe they have. I mean, like we've seen like Reddit threads of like people who like have completely different perceptions of characters and dynamics or shipping. Like, oh, I want these two characters to be together, and you're like, what are you fucking talking about? So yeah, so like this idea of just like, oh, let's just bring in like random writers. It's like, what do you do? Like, no.
Well, if you have like if we think of something like The Sopranos, right? I know every single writer on that show, and they all have
Mhm.
different like unique things that they're bringing to the show. Terry Winter, Matt Weiner, Robin Green, and Mitch Burgess. Like these are names that I know their specific work because that's how talented they are. And they all went on to make their own shows too. Terrence Winter did Boardwalk. Matt Weiner did Mad Men. Robin Burgess and Mitch Green have a show called Blue Bloods, which I haven't seen, but it's been going on for a very long time.
Oh my god, yeah, it has.
So again, these people, not only are they so talented that their individual work shines within David Chase's umbrella of his vision of The Sopranos, but again, they're also able to translate those skills into advancing television. Right? They all contributed with their own shows, and for the most part, like the shows that I've seen of theirs have been really fantastic, and I'm glad that they've been made. But that's just something that with the current model of Hollywood is less and less likely to happen.
Yeah, it's interesting too because there's sort of a balance between um wanting when it comes to like assigned directors for a television show, particularly a television show. There's sort of a strange balance between wanting to allow directors and the artists involved to kind of express their own style, but also keeping it as in tune as one cohesive
Yeah,
vision. Funny enough, this was something that the Marvel Cinematic Universe got shit for about how
yeah,
they would try to bring in like these artistic directors, but Marvel would try to clamp down on them. It's like,
oh
look,
yeah,
we're making these films as like sort of like it's like a brand, they're all
oh yeah,
taking place in the same universe. So they kind of you kind of have to like toe the line. And then obviously
yeah,
that turns off a lot of like big directors because they're like, I mean, like with some exceptions like Sam Raimi or
yeah,
Chloe Zhao or something, for the most part, it's like I'm not watching a Marvel film and I'm like, oh yeah, this director totally directed it.
yeah.
Um,
It's
but that's
corporate.
like with yeah, but that's like with separate films. But when it comes to like a television show, again, it's trying to make like this
Hmm.
singular aesthetic. So there can be like small embellishes, but also you want to have, again, everyone should be on the same page of the style we're going for. The episode that comes to mind of The Sopranos is Chasing It, which
Mm.
was the only I think it was the only episode in the entire show, at least to an extent, to this extent, where it was shot
Shaky
handheld.
cam.
It was very and it's so funny because it's like the style of The Sopranos was so like burned into your brain, like it's not like showy or flashy, but it's very distinct. And then this episode comes along and you're like, what am I watching? This is weird. It's
Yeah, but I mean, I think that was intentional for this one because I mean, it was written by Matt Weiner, who, he joined in the fifth season, so he'd been established by that point. But it was directed by Timothy Van Patten, who had been there from pretty much the beginning. And I think it's meant to reflect Tony again losing it, like in this episode. And I've heard people criticize the writing of this episode of being like it made Tony way too low, like it wanted to show him in a really bad light. But I don't know. I felt like I thought it did a good job artistically of what it was trying to portray, which is Tony's extreme moral decline that we see throughout the last season, but really in particularly this one, he's made to look extremely pathetic.
yeah, that's the thing. It's like it's always like the different thing. I don't think the writing's I think the writing's perfect. This is like it's again, this is like where it goes back to like what we were talking about like making sure everyone's sort of on the same page with the characters. When people say shit like that, like, oh yeah, man, this is where Tony really showed his true colors. And I'm like, what show have you been watching where like you
Yeah,
don't think this is completely in line with Tony's character? This is after. I mean, even if we're going, like later in the series, this is after he beats up Perry, in season 6. This is
yeah,
after, um, he he sicks Bobby, who at that point had never killed anyone,
yeah,
on the French guy just because he was pissed that he lost the fight between
The
them.
fight with him,
It's
yeah.
like, yeah, this idea that like, oh man, he went too low here. It's like, what show are you watching, guys?
Yeah. No, I mean it's definitely it's shocking how much it's come to the surface. I
Hmm.
think before this, Tony's been able to hide it more, but especially in the last season, like it's starting to fray. And it is the ugliness of his soul is really coming to the surface. And it's a shocking difference when compared to the first season. I mean, he looks worse, not just the weight that obviously Jim Gandolfini gained partially for the role, but partially also I think in real life. Um, but again, we're seeing it all come to the surface, and we're seeing him lose control, which he's been a man who has held control viciously and like way too much to an extent in the previous seasons. But really, here we're seeing him lose it through the gambling. It's destroying his friendship with Hesh. It's destroying his relationship with his wife and all the people in his life. And again, I thought the editing. I mean, the shaky cam was obviously very different, but I thought it was appropriate for the most part. And Sopranos is also a show that had a lot of really weird editing in it. Like the quintessential example for me is the star wipe that happens with Carmela, where it looks like something out of Star Wars. In fact, I'm actually doing a video right now where I make that joke where it wipes to a Star Wars scene. There were a lot of weird little editing quirks throughout the show. It's definitely not as polished as some of the shows that came after it.
That's the weirdest. It's like, what is that? And like it like as she's walking away, it goes to slow mo for a second, and then a freeze frame, and then the wipe, and you're like, what the fuck is this? What?
I want to
It's
actually
like
look up what episode that happens in.
it's season
Cold
5,
Cuts. Cold Cuts, yeah.
episode 11. Is it?
Did you know that off the top of your head?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Really?
Yeah, because it's the one where they go up to the farm, and then because it's the one where Chris
Yeah, yeah.
cries on the way back
Cold
after he
Cuts, yeah,
gets made
yeah.
fun of. Yeah.
Funny enough, okay, so I was looking up who directed this episode, and it was directed by a guy named Michael Figgis, who I don't know him, but I believe just from looking at the list here, this is the only one he directed. So that might explain why it was so weird.
It's just weird that it's like I don't
Yeah,
even
it's the
think
only one.
there. I don't even think that's like there are other transitions in the episode like that. It's just
No,
that's the one, and it's like, what the fuck
and,
is this?
and who knows if it was his decision or it was the editor's decision? Because that's a whole separate process of
Yeah, or
getting it
maybe,
edited.
or maybe I don't know. Like maybe like there was like a technical problem, and they had to use iMovie to like finish it. I
I
don't
get
know.
maybe.
Unbelievable.
The ADR also on The Sopranos was pretty awful. Like, I went back and rewatched the show recently in its entirety, and I hear it so much now. Like when it's obviously a line from a different take or something that they've
Hmm.
inserted in here. It just doesn't sound good. And I think some of that's just ADR technology has become a lot stronger since that that show came out. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think David was as nitpicky as someone like Matt Weiner is. Like Matt is extremely anal retentive when it came to Mad Men. But I think David was just much more focused on just the overall show than like getting into like the weeds about this shit.
Should we also discuss the awful CGI of Livia Soprano in
Oh
season
god,
3?
that is like if you ask me what the biggest mistake the show ever made was, it was that scene. Like
I can't.
there was no reason to include it.
I don't. That was the thing I didn't understand, was that the whole episode was. I actually think it almost. I understand they wanted to have that one scene between Tony and Livia before her death, but
It
I
would have been
actually
so much
think
better if they never
it.
talked.
Yeah, it would have, because that just goes along with the show. This idea of just like shit happens, and it just.
I think they were caught off guard by Nancy Marchand's very unfortunate death. Like, and they had to completely change the trajectory of the season because of that. There was going to be a whole
Hmm.
storyline with her and the airline tickets. but it's just like what they talk about in that scene is not even anything good because it's all just reused lines that she had throughout the show. So it's not even like Tony's getting a final like, fuck you, mom, for all the shit you did to me over the years. It's just pointless. And it costs a lot of fucking money too. If you look at the notes in the Wikipedia page for how much that scene cost, they spent like hundreds of thousands of dollars on it for I don't know. Some people in my comment section have said that they never noticed the CGI Livia, so it obviously worked, for some people, but for me, it just looks really awful.
Now look here. And the funny part is like they use lines from early, I think in season 1. She says that to Junior. Now look here. I don't like
Yeah,
that kind of
don't like
talk.
that language. Like, it's not
Stop it.
even
It
not even
upsets
good
me.
dialogue for them to have in their final exchange. So, but it's funny though nowadays. So if they wanted to do that, they could use AI to replicate her voice, and they could
Of
just
course.
like they could do a whole thing, which AI is another big thing about this Writers Guild strike. And how much is that going to is that going to replace writers in the future? Are we just going to have AI generated scripts and even potentially AI acted shows? Like, are they going to replace actors one day with really good CGI replications? Like some of the stuff that they can do nowadays with like Mid Journey and all this image generation tools is really really convincing.
Well, I think that was so. Yeah, the idea was that like oh, we can make scripts that are AI and then give them to a writer, where it's like maybe 75% of the job's already done, and then you have to brush up the dialogue and then polish it. You're not just starting from page one.
I think that's stupid.
It's very stupid. It's I mean like, but on the other hand, it's like I mean to some extent, so many of these like Hollywood films
Oh, they're
are so
basically AI generated already.
they're so cookie cutter to an extent where it's almost like when I first read that I was like, wow, it's fucked up. But then I'm like, well, I mean,
You really couldn't
they
tell
are
the
like cookie
difference
cutter
between some of them already.
to some extent, yeah.
But yeah, I think the bigger problem with it is not necessarily just the quality, but it's the fact that if you shrink the writer staff like we've been talking about, it's not that you're going to have the same like the same caliber of writers doing the same work but just less work. You're going to instead hire like a minimum wage writer like fresh out of college or whatever who doesn't have the experience, because again 90% of the work has been done. So why would I pay a Terrence Winter the salary he got on Sopranos to be a fantastic writer when I can pay just some kid to clean up what the robot did for free?
Hmm.
So I think it's obviously it's we all know it's gonna be very shitty television if they do that. But I wonder how much of it is inevitable given just like it just seems like that's going to be the reality of our lives for a lot of things, not just writers, for television, but it just seems like AI is going to replace a lot of white collar work that we. By the way, it amazes me the irony that for all of like history when we've written sci-fi about artificial intelligence, it was supposed to wipe out the blue collar work. Robots were supposed to be plumbers and construction workers and stuff, and it was gonna and all the white collar people were gonna be free to write poetry or whatever other bullshit they wanted to do. But it's funny that like how it turned out was no, those blue collar workers, they're actually more well paid than ever. But it's all you poetry writers who are getting replaced with with the fucking robot.
Yeah, they're always it's kind of similar to how like I think like bookstores will always be around. There's always going to be a market for, particularly like if we're talking about crafts like welding or carpentry, stuff like that. There's always going to be a market for handcrafted goods. um yeah, it's funny enough, I forget what it was, but I think there's actually obviously the a huge controversy was farming eventually being taken over by machines and stuff. However, if I'm not mistaken, I actually think that kind of met its cap, where it it has gotten to the point where there are certain things, I'm not exactly sure what, but there are certain elements of agriculture or farming that like they've actually tried to use machines and it just doesn't work. There are limitations to it. So those will always be sort of like, um taken care of. Whereas with, like data entry jobs I've had, and it's like, yeah, this shit can be, there's technology where you can strip all the information from a web page. So yeah.
there's 2 points to that. One, I think it reveals a lot of the inconsequentiality of white collar work for a lot of America, a lot of the world, right? A lot of the big, like, well paying jobs, like Twitter is a great example, like how we started this conversation. A lot of the people who got let go there were like people who weren't really doing anything. Like it's the extra stuff. It's like I'm an event coordinator to coordinate party like lunch parties for our staff and stuff like that. It's stuff that's not as consequential as the market would kind of have us believe based on how much they're earning. And a lot of AI's replacing a lot of that stuff. But the thing about the technology for farming and stuff like that, again, I think it's the same kind of problem that we're seeing with the writers' rooms and stuff. Is that like there's still humans involved, but like it's lowered the skill cap so much that the people who are working in there get paid a lot less. Like the workers, the people who own the land and everything are making a whole lot of money, more money than ever. But I think it's the same thing we're seeing with the writers' room, which is yes, there will be people involved, but it's going to be less skilled work, and therefore they're going to make less money, and in that case, produce a less good product. So that's my biggest worry with the introduction of AI. Anything,
Mm. Well, it's funny you mentioned that because there was a book that came out in 2018 called Bullshit Jobs. And it basically was like exploring this idea of like how many jobs out there that are just so redundant or just unnecessary. And they're the only, or I think we actually learned this from, COVID was, I mean, not only can it's like, hey, we got rid of half our workforce and nothing happened, but also when you think about why are there so many, so when I was working at I was working at a real estate agency job, um, and we were all in the office. And then I think at one point I just asked my boss, "Is like, can I work from home?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." And I just started working from home, where other people had to come into the office. And I kind of realized it's like there's actually no reason why we have this office. It's like, or you could like scale it down considerably. There's no need for it. But what I realized was working for these two dudes, they're kind of chodes, um, was that it was about the prestige. It was the idea of like, we want an office. We want to, they tried to like, it's like, well, morale and stuff like that. Yeah, yeah, whatever. Um, if you want morale, pay your workers $20 an hour, $25 an hour. The morale will be fine. And you probably could afford to do that if you didn't pay $20,000 a month for this space that you really don't need. But then and this is kind of what the book goes into, this idea of like certain jobs like receptionists or, obviously it depends on the duties at a particular company, but like a receptionist or assistants or stuff like that. It's a lot of it is based around this idea of, um, keeping up appearances or wanting to, it's like sort of like making it seem like it's an important, well functioning business. Like, it's like a lot, I think, funny enough, going back to writers rooms, um writers assistants, what do they do, like what do they even do, like I don't even know. Yeah, it's like, it's like, well, they can get their own coffee or they can pay someone else on their own time, but yeah, it's this idea of like it's almost like a perk in a way of like trying to sort of, it's like a lot of it is this veneer of white collar work and like flashy yada yada yada. But in reality, like 50% of it is like bullshit for the most part.
Oh, probably more than 50.
Yeah.
But I wanted to kind of briefly ask you this question because I know you went to film school. Have you ever done any like screenwriting, or do you have any like aspirations to do any like actually produce something like that?
Yeah, I wrote a couple pilots that are pretty much polished. Um I I submitted them to a bunch of contests and they actually, a couple of them did pretty well. But it was around that time that the YouTube thing was kind of taken off, and I like all my attention went into that. So yeah, it's still on the back burner. I still have them. I think the concepts are pretty strong. Um, but yeah, hopefully one day, maybe.
I gotcha. I so my background in writing, which it's something I've been doing for a long, long time. I wanted to do for a long, long time. Has been more kind of like in prose, like in novels and stuff like that. Which I think I'm going to return to that too one day. I think we both do a lot of writing for YouTube. Like that's like writing the scripts for videos takes an insane amount of time,
Hmm.
and it can kind of be exhausting to write a whole thing for a video and then also go write something extra on top of that that is not going to see the light of day for a long time. But I would like to get back into that too. I don't really want to go into Hollywood per se. I just for all the problems we talked about, it just seems like not a great place to work. But I'd love to make my own thing, kind of independent from the traditional Hollywood system.
Yeah, and I think especially nowadays, that's very possible, especially with all the
Yeah,
streaming services, YouTube, all that stuff. Um, Funny enough, you actually kind of what we were kind of discussing was this idea of sort of oversaturation of the market
yeah,
in terms of film projects and releasing films, and how that is in large part why a lot of the quality isn't good. It's not that the
yeah,
writers are bad. It's that if in a lot of these cases you're giving them a very very small time frame to do very very
yeah,
big projects. And we saw that with the VFX and whatnot. This idea that like, oh well, they're not good artists if they just like that was like the mentality where it's like the VF when like all these shows had bad visual effects, they're like, oh yeah, these artists just instead of like looking at it and being like, well, clearly these people need more time to
yeah,
work and like to exercise their skill. People had this idea of it's like, well, they just need to get better artists, and it's like that's not how these things work, especially
yeah,
stuff like writing.
yeah,
It's not a thing where it's just, oh well, if you're a better writer you can work quicker. That's not how that works.
yeah,
um so yeah, so what'll eventually happen, and I think I always bring this up. I actually don't know where I actually read it, but I remember reading it because it was very big. um, or sort of like a wake up call for me. It was James Cameron and George Lucas. They both said separately at some time that eventually what's going to happen is that this oversaturation of of like the film industry is going to end up resulting in a complete paradigm shift where instead of a studio releasing a bunch of like films throughout the year, what they're going to do is they're going to have these like massive singular tentpole films.
hmm
And we might only see like two a year.
yeah,
Like there's only going to see two of these films come out every 6 months or so. But these things are going to be like hyper produced. They're going to be huge epic films. IMAX. They were talking about like theaters built just for these movies.
yeah,
Which, when we look at James Cameron Avatar, it seems
yep,
like we're going in that direction.
oh yeah,
And then the rest of the time, for when it comes to like streaming and stuff like that, then studios can put out more niche
yeah.
pictures, smaller, lower budget pictures. But a lot of
That's what
them are
they've
going
been
to
doing
be
too.
yeah, but a lot of them are going to be based on that idea. And actually, it makes sense when you look at say like the Disney Channel, not Disney Channel, sorry, the Disney remakes.
Yeah.
Um, People love to shit on the Lion King. That movie made $1.5 billion.
Oh
The
yeah.
Lion King remake.
Yeah.
It's people like joke about Minions. I think that movie made over $1 billion. I think what's ironic is I think a lot of times when people are sort of like like film bro Twitter and stuff like that, or even YouTube, I think people sometimes they kind of lose the pulse of like the movie going public sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Like again, like people are like wait, the Lion King remake made a $1.6 billion. That movie was awful. It's like, yeah, but like th- most people who go to the movies are not, or like even like Avatar. It's like, why did this
Yeah.
movie make so much money? It's because the people who are most people who go to the movies are not going for like the same reasons like you and I are, or we're not
Yeah, yeah,
looking for the same things. It that even carries over into um we were talking about AMC and how they're shifting to more, you know, the ticket prices are going up, but you know they're putting bars
yeah, yeah.
in the theaters. The chairs are like recliners. You know,
Hmm.
there's food service at a lot of them now. And the idea is that they're changing the movie going experience. You're not just
Yeah.
going someplace to watch a movie. It's sort of it's becoming like an experience.
Oh yeah, of
Um,
course.
and that's kind of how you tap into that way. You can kind of get people who wouldn't just be, because again, there'll always be people who want to see a particular movie,
Yeah,
but this way you can tap into a market where people who wouldn't normally go to movies
yeah,
are going to go to the theater more for the experience rather
yeah, yeah.
than I want to see X movie or something.
Yeah, and I mean, that's obviously why they're focusing on the big, like, why, like, people always complain, why are they always making remakes or, franchise films like this? Well, it's because that's the only thing people go and see, even if you hate it, right? Like, the people who are complaining about the Little Mermaid or whatever, which actually comes out today as of recording this. I'm very interested to see how it does because people were like arguing whether it's going to flop or not. Even the people who hate these kind of movies, that's all they talk about. Like, they don't go see like the very few like independent or art house films that do get released, and I'm guilty of that too. I don't go see any of those movies either. One, because again, ticket prices have gone up, it's gotten more expensive, so if you're going to go see something, you want it to be something that you're going to like, and you're going to be at least interested in. But yeah, I mean, I feel like the theater experience for just kind of random mid budget movies is dead, and it's never going to come back. It's only going to be catered towards these big franchises, which will continue to exist. Like we discussed, Marvel has kind of been lower than it has been, but they're still going to be making more Star Wars movies or superhero films, and they'll get a pretty good audience. But yeah, hopefully streaming and stuff will allow for that's the place where smaller stuff can live. We'll have to see because a lot of these streaming services have been we talked about the whole Netflix problem with a lot of their originals have not been doing so well
It,
either. So
it's ironic that like now they're becoming oversaturated.
yeah.
The streaming market's becoming oversaturated. They were supposed to solve the problem of the
Yeah.
oversaturation of the theater, and now they're becoming oversaturated.
And it's also to be said too, I think independent content creators like producing stuff that's not well produced in the sense that they're not trying to make like movies or anything, but people making YouTube content, Twitch content, that's a whole other thing now that exists that is a lot of times more engaging than watching a film. Like, a lot of times I'm just going to watch someone play a video game or talk about a video game rather than going to watch something like this that in a theater. So yeah, what the future looks like for creativity is very much up in the air.
Funny enough, you also brought up you mentioned the cutting out the middleman or cutting out the middle budget film. Funny enough, I think I've mentioned this before, but it was Matt Damon who I saw a clip of. Um, and he explained why that is. Back in before streaming and all that stuff, before this came out, um, if a movie, so let's say a movie was made for $80 million, it gets put into theaters and it only makes 50 million. So it's like, oh shit, it didn't make a profit. Well, what Matt Damon mentioned, and this is it's such a I didn't even think of this. He said the reason that is okay because when it comes out on DVD like 6 months later, you're gonna get another big chunk. If not, sometimes I think the Shawshank Redemption is one movie where its initial theatrical run, it actually it wasn't technically like it wasn't like a huge flop, but I don't think it recuperated. But then when um, DVD sales or VHS sales came out, it made a shit ton of money through word of mouth.
I feel like we went through this
Um,
story on
yeah.
another podcast before.
Well, it's just interesting that like when you were talking about how like the middle budget film is dying, And it's like, oh shit, that makes sense
That's another
because
reason, yeah.
yeah.
And that's another thing the Writers Guild strike is kind of fighting about too, which we didn't talk about, which is streaming has changed the landscape for television, and streaming services do not pay the same way that traditional television did with like royalties and syndication and stuff like that. I think they're getting paid like pennies compared to the dollars they were getting before this.
Oh, because they're still are they still technically known as like web series?
Yeah, it's like, well, it's not. It's when they're broadcasting a show on repeat, right? Like on NBC, you get paid money whenever they air it. You know, even years later. But streaming services, since it's a different medium, they say they don't have to pay the same uh, money to stream it to people online, and that's another thing people are fighting about, which is again a lot of the money has moved away from the working class, even in Hollywood. Now I know some people will get mad at calling the Hollywood writers working class, right? Because it's a very cushy job compared to digging a ditch or something. But again, a lot of money has moved away from the people creating it to again these companies which are still making billions and billions of dollars off of this.
Yeah, and that even goes to I think even that sort of when we think about like I mean blue collar and white collar I think is different, but when we're talking about like the working class, usually we're talking about income. That's sort of like the defining factor. And I think we do sort of like you even mentioned this idea of like, oh, you know, janitors or garbage men or mailmen or something like that. A lot of these workers make pretty good money. They make very decent wages. They often have unions that go to bat for them, and they have really good benefits. A lot of job security, of course. So there's a lot of it's like, oh well, they're working class. They a lot of they're jobs that are not seen as like flashy or it doesn't have the prestige, but they're very very solid jobs if you can get one. Whereas then it's like if I'm like thinking like today, like what the working class would be, like how many kids are like working like data entry jobs that pay like 30K a year, that they're just able to get by on. Um, and yeah, like that's sort of it's sort of shifted that way where it's just like going back to what you said, like when it comes to writers, a lot of the people, it's like, oh, I write for this magazine or I write for this publication. It's like, yeah, you don't make good money doing that. You kind of make shit money doing that. But it's about the prestige of telling people, hey, I write for such and such.
Well, but like I said too, it's that the AI and stuff has again replaced a lot of white collar stuff, but the blue collar stuff is protected because they're not anywhere close to having robots walking around like humanoid form doing these kind of jobs. So if you are a plumber, your job security is very safe. There's people are always going to need that. There was a thing, I don't know if this is true or if I'm just repeating a rumor or not, but there was this whole thing about like plumbers in Japan make more than like doctors because everyone there goes to school, tries to become a doctor, whatever, and then the people who are left to do the dirty work, you have to pay them what they want. So yeah, it's just funny that a lot of blue collar work has been pretty stable, and that's not true of everything, right? We've seen unions for working like blue collar labor get destroyed over time. The whole Amazon fulfillment center stuff is a prime example of that. So it's not all rainbows and sunshine in that world either. But yeah, I don't think there's any reason to be against the Writers Guild strike, even if you hate television nowadays. Like taking the side of the corporations over the writers is really against everyone's best interests in my mind.
I really don't. It's so funny how you get like, it's so funny how you get people like this where they'll say shit like that. Like you brought up, like people, it's like, oh, well, the writers aren't doing a good job. So they shouldn't be hired. And then like you said, it's like why doesn't it enter your brain the idea that like, hey, maybe the poor quality of the writing is as a result of the working conditions. Like it's like, but there are so many people who like think they're such like they're smart and like are hot shit that they don't even think about this shit. Like just
And
use
even
your
if it's
fucking head.
not who I still don't want the corporations to just be making all that money instead of the people. Like even if the writers are shit, which some of them probably are. Like, I'd rather it be in their hands than in the fucking billionaire CEO. So I don't know. It's just stupid.
There's sort of a weird like and funny enough, you brought up Elon Musk. I do kind of feel like we did see that a little bit, a lot of that with Elon Musk, where a lot of people were like, they were like, they would like simp for Elon Musk under the guise of like yeah, fuck, like own the libs or like like counterculture, whatever. But then it's like, wait, hang on, why are you like sucking the boots of like this like CEO? Like, weren't like 6 months ago, weren't you all about like anti corporations and like against all this shit? And it's weird how like that shift, or like even I mean, like not to like bring it into like a more like serious subject, but even like the Ukraine Russia conflict, where it's like I see so many takes of like people like, again, like 6 months ago they were like Russia bad and Russia's terrible and they're gonna get us, and then now they're like, it's like, yeah, man, they're like they're what's sort of what I'm looking for. They're sort of like doing a lip service for like Putin and Russia, and it's like, what do you?
The whole Russian issue has changed. Like these issues go back and forth, right? When people were started saying that the Russians were the reason Trump won, now it became like, okay, Russians are pro, like right wing politics, and if you hate the liberals, now you support their. And again, this is the problem with the culture war, which I hate so fucking much, and we've talked about this a million times, and I know people probably hate hearing about this, but the culture war and this whole identity politics really in my mind are a distraction for it's a way to keep people fighting rather than focusing on issues which affect all of us, which are again the kind of the class struggles, the kind of business corporation interest versus regular people. And I know when I say that, I probably sound like a liberal communist. I'm not. I fucking love owning shit. I fucking love buying shit. But I just think that they're having more protections for the middle class is better than unchecked capitalism, and it's better for I think more people will have money in their pockets with those kind of protections in mind, and they'll be able to buy more shit, and the economy will be better overall rather than all the wealth concentrated in the hands of just the few rich elite.
Yeah, it's, and again, it's like, you don't want to like blame it on the culture war, but it does get to the point where you'll see people have these like really extreme takes like on a certain situation, a situation that like it's very easy, like in most situations any person who has like half a brain can add a decent amount of you know nuance to the situation. But the issue is that because of like culture war bullshit, it sort of it takes like generally well reasoned and intelligent people and turns them into like rabid lunatics, where they end up taking a certain side to like own the cons or own the libs, and it like shuts their brain off, where they just, it's because it's not about like, hey, what is the actual solution that would be best for this particular problem. It's what is the side that I need to take to sort of like, because if I don't take this, then the other people will be mad. And then like it takes people into like wacky air places like Ukraine, Russia, the whole like Twitter thing with Elon, that was wild, where people were like siding with him and Twitter all of a sudden, and it was just like I was getting so fucking confused.
Yeah. And again, I know we're getting into some deep politics here, which I don't like to talk about too often because I don't want to. I'm not David Simon. I'm not here to fucking lecture you about what you should or should not believe. But I do agree with you that I think the vast majority of us could get along. Like if you talk to any single person, I feel like the vast majority of people are reasonable, and even if there's disagreements about certain things, it's not to the point of hatred that gets posted about online. But I feel like those fires are being stoked intentionally to create conflict to keep people divided so that they're not kind of focused on the real issues, which are much more economic in my mind.
And that kind of circles back to, we were talking about like with Twitter and stuff, about how I think sometimes people can get so. I'm so excited for my trip to Dublin coming up because I can't wait to kind of just like be. My girlfriend was like, "Hey, do you want to?" She's getting like a phone plan that you can get where you
Mm,
can. It's like, oh, you can use data on your phone while you're overseas. I didn't even think
yeah,
of that. And but then I was like, oh well, can you use Wi-Fi? It's like, yeah, as long as there's Wi-Fi somewhere, you can connect to it.
yeah, of
And I'm
course,
like, I think I'm gonna do that because I don't want to have.
yeah,
It's like, oh well, you want to have service when you're in the middle of nowhere. I'm like, good, good. That's what I want. I don't want to.
yeah,
I'll check in on it every now and then just to make sure stuff's good.
yeah.
But like, I think it's gonna be really good for me to like unplug for a while. Because, and
No,
again, going back to like the whole like, oh, how did Lion King make 1.6 billion? Everyone on Twitter
yeah,
hates it. It's like, yeah, it's not everyone is on Twitter.
not
Most
not
normal
everyone. Yeah,
people are not on Twitter or don't give or don't like. Maybe they have an account, but they're not
yeah,
like ingrained in all the drama
yeah.
and shit.
No, I think it'll be good for you to disconnect. Like I last year we took a 2 week trip to Thailand, which was really fun. But the much more enjoyable thing for me was just being completely unplugged from the concerns of what's going on here. Not just the culture war and stuff, but just like my job and my life. Like it just all that stuff went away for a while, and I could just kind of relax and breathe. And when you come back, you really feel it. You feel the weight start to kind of push back on you again. But yeah, it'll be really great for you, and you guys will notice a break for a little while as Mac's going to be away, so we'll
Oh
record when
yeah.
he gets
Oh
back.
yeah, I was
But
gonna tell you that. It's like we have to postpone
yeah,
it
no,
for
no.
it's I'm only going for 10 days, so I think we'll only miss yeah, we'll only miss 1 week, the
So
ninth.
if you
So
guys have any complaints, please direct them towards Mac. I
yeah.
wanted to be here recording with you. Maybe I'll record an episode and I'll just pretend to be you. So I'll get the hat and the glasses and I'll give the takes I think you would give in this
Yeah.
situation.
Or just get a YouTuber who looks kind of like me and be like, oh hey, this is Max stand-in for the time being.
I'll get Destiny to do it. I feel like you and Destiny have a lot of similarities.
What?
not
I don't have blue hair.
not looks, not in terms of looks, but like I feel like we give some similar takes.
Maybe. We'll see.
We'll
We'll
see.
always find that one. We both hate like red pill
Yeah.
pickup artist
Didn't you
douche.
didn't you talk to him recently? Weren't you on like a stream together?
Accidentally, I was talking to another guy about a topic, and then like a half an hour before, he's like, "Hey, do you know Destiny?" I'm like, "Yeah." It's like, "Hey, he's gonna hop on too because he agreed with your take on this," and I was like, "Oh shit, okay, fine." Um, yeah, it's a good conversation, but it was just kind of like random. I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, sure, why not?"
Yeah. So perfect example. He'll be on the next one. But anyway, we've hit our hour here. Thank you all for listening, and stay tuned for the next. No one's a critic coming eventually.
Take care, y'all.